starting a new series today, a short one, but it's kind of exciting. We've done Mark almost all through our existence, pretty much the whole way, so this is new for us. And I thought I'd just start by telling you a bit about me. So since I was a kid, I've tried to do what some of us grew up calling quiet times or devotions. Anyone know those words? Basically, spending time with God in the morning. I've had varying amounts of success at that kind of rhythm. I think what's made it easier at times is to pick a specific place that I go to every time, kind of like a sacred spot that I can return to every morning. So for a while it was this particular chair in my living room, and for another period of my life it was a pillow in my closet, which I know is a little ironic for a gay person like me, to go to the closet to be with God. Going to the closet, yeah. Other times, it's been an outdoor spot where I wanted to pray. So the top of a hill near my house in Saskatoon where I lived was one spot. At summer camp, it was this mossy log in the forest. When I lived in Strathcona, there was this labyrinth that was painted on the cement near my place. That was the place I went. And then earlier than that, when I was in Jericho area, I went to the Pacific Rock on Jericho Beach. But over the last few months, I've been trying something new, something a bit more mobile. So every morning, I've been waking up early and walking for about an hour in my neighborhood. And I don't have a predetermined route. I just try not to go the same way I went the day before. Sometimes I just change directions all of a sudden, like when the sun is in my eyes or a crow tries to attack me, which seems to be happening more and more these days. I don't know if it's my red hair or what. They're just like all over me. Sometimes I'll just walk along the same street for half an hour and then cross the street and walk on the other side all the way back. I don't really do like stereotypical devotional type things. I just try to stay alert, to be listening and watching carefully. I used to do biology as kind of my main area of interest, so I try to identify plants and birds that I don't recognize. I carry binoculars with me like a big nerd. And when I see a plant in someone's garden that I don't recognize, I take a photo and I return home, and I have an app on my phone that helps me identify plants, and I use YouTube and a bird book to identify birds that I don't know that are singing. One morning I heard a really strange bird call, and I ran to try to figure out what it was before it flew away, only to realize that it was the chirp of the walk signal at the traffic light. Very unique bird. When I see somebody, as I'm walking, if I see someone, I try to say kind of a silent blessing for them, and usually it's elderly Chinese people who are up at that hour with me, or people who are leaving early for work who look at me funny because I'm probably taking a photo of their flowers or standing in the middle of the street with my binoculars. This week I walked past a Catholic church and noticed that the doors were open, so I sat inside on a pew for a while. I should have lit a candle like you were talking about, but I was just praying for some of the priests and the members there. One time Denise woke up early enough to come with me. That was a unique time, entirely different experience, but just as wonderful because she taught me this practice of giving a fist bump to those stone lions that kind of look like this that are at people's gates sometimes. So every time I go by, I give them fist bumps. It's important practice. I try to stay open and stay curious about how God will choose to surprise me on those walks. So sometimes it's a hummingbird that comes kind of whizzing across my path, or lighting up this tree all orange in the sunrise. And it's been really different for me, trying to find God in motion, in the walking, instead of going to a stationary sacred place or destination. Finding God on the sidewalks and on the streets, in the city, instead of a more secluded, kind of natural place. And I started thinking about how Jesus liked to escape to secluded places, but Jesus also walked a whole lot. From village to village, place to place. This must have given him time to notice things, to notice people. Even when people tried to rush him, even when his friend was dying, he took his time and he walked, stopping to heal people who crossed his path along the way, to bless the kids who zoomed by, to consider the lilies. So for him, it wasn't just about getting there, it was about what happened along the way. And a couple of you were here 2 weeks ago when we were wrapping up our series in Mark, and we were talking about Jesus reaching his final destination, arriving at Jerusalem, at the temple, where he would eventually be arrested and crucified. And Jerusalem for Jesus was a place of grief, of frustration, of confrontation, where he turned over tables and debated with the priests. But we're going to look at a song today about another arrival in Jerusalem. It was written 3,000 years ago, 1,000 years before Jesus' time. And listen to the tone of this writer. He's having a much different experience of Jerusalem than Jesus did. Is there anyone who wants to come and read? I've got it printed out. It's very short. Any readers among us? Oh, thanks, Shirley.
I was glad when they said to me, "Let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem, built as a city that is bound firmly together. To it the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, as was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. For there the thrones for judgment were set up, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Peace be within your walls, and security within your towers. For the sake of my relatives and friends, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good."
The word of the Lord. So I want to invite you to close your eyes with me, actually to close your eyes, and I can see all of you, so I know if you're doing it. And imagine that you are a 30-year-old male Israelite 3,000 years ago, so this is a stretch for some of us. You live in a small village. This is virtual reality right now. This is without the headset, but you live in a small village. You own an olive grove. And your weeks are pretty predictable. You tend the olives for 6 days and rest on the Sabbath day. And every time you sell your olives, you set aside some money to prepare for the major highlights of your year, which are your 3 pilgrimages to Jerusalem. Passover in the spring, the Feast of Weeks 7 weeks later, and the Feast of Tabernacles at harvest time. You and every other man in Israel over age 30 are required to attend these festivals. Some of the women and children choose to join you, and others stay behind for smaller local celebrations. These pilgrimages can be a bit daunting. With kids on the journey, moving slowly, you walk for about 5 days. You travel with others from your village, hoping that your numbers will ward off the thieves and wild animals. The walking itself is a kind of prayer, a cleansing, a preparation. And along the way, you sing. There are 15 key songs that everyone learns for this journey, the songs of Ascent. Jerusalem is the highest city in Palestine, so no matter which way you're coming from, you're going upward. And as you get closer to Jerusalem, you meet up with other traveling groups, reuniting with friends and extended family that you haven't seen since the last festival. You eventually merge into a big crowd, blending with all the other tribes, and the mood is electric. You see the walls of the city. You glimpse the dome of the temple, God's dwelling place. You cross through the gates. And suddenly there's the markets and the smells and sounds, the sheer size of everything. It hits you in an overwhelming wave. And through the chaos of this city overflowing with pilgrims, you hear hundreds of priests chanting those very same songs of ascent as they walk up the steps to the temple court, one song for each of the steps. And you find yourself spontaneously praying prayers of thanksgiving, asking God for peace, unity, justice, prosperity. You want your people and your family and this glorious city of God to last forever. And this brings us back to our song. You can open your eyes now. Thank you. So it's a fun imagination exercise, but is reading this psalm any more than just a history lesson? What does this 3,000-year-old psalm from halfway around the world have to do with us at Open Way? Now, some Christians and Jews still make pilgrimages to Jerusalem. I've never done that, but I'd love to someday. There are still prayers being raised around the world for peace in Jerusalem, prayers that have seemingly gone unanswered for centuries. But the temple is no longer really centrally important, even for Jews. Much has changed historically and even theologically speaking. So 2 weeks ago, we discussed the symbol of the withered fig tree and how Jesus used it to show that the temple's season had come to an end, that the temple was no longer fruitful. Jesus had brought heaven to earth in the form of a human and left his spirit to indwell all of us. So God is no longer limited to specific buildings or even specific cities, because the temple of God is now located within the people of God. And we have direct access to God wherever we are, in Jerusalem, in Vancouver, in church, walking on the street. And because that's true, I think that this psalm and the rest of the Psalms of Ascent are actually more relevant to us now. Because of Jesus, we don't have to travel to Jerusalem to sing them. We can sing these songs wherever we walk and wander, and we can pray for the peace of whatever city or neighborhood we're in. Because we are already in the house of God, we carry God's presence with us. So as an extended example, I thought we could translate this psalm into Vancouver. Our feet are standing within your gates, O Vancouver. And we know that where the mountains meet the ocean, we are in the house of God. God is here imaged in all the different faces from all the different cultures in Vancouver, playing among the red freighters and the purple sea stars, walking along the shimmering skyline of glass that our city has. And so we can give thanks to the name of the Lord, the creator of cherry blossoms and orcas and all the wonderful ingredients for craft beers and sushi. And like Jerusalem, Vancouver is built as a city that is bound firmly together. It's an interesting observation that the psalmist makes. And just like Jerusalem, we have people stacked on top of each other. We have condos rising ever higher. And we long for this tightly knit structure and architecture to be mirrored in our tightly knit communities. Especially with elections approaching, we long for unity in our city, for common ground, understanding and empathy between the different tribes and nations that live here. Like Jerusalem, Vancouver is a city with thrones for judgment. Actually, Mark and Shirley's kids are lawyers and can work in this city. There's lots of law here. People come here with a thirst for justice. And we have different ideas about what justice means. But the word for justice in this psalm is mishpat, and it's a heavenly standard. Leviticus describes mishpat this way: when you beat the olives from your olive trees, because remember, in a virtual life, you are an olive farmer, don't go back a second time to collect what you missed the first time when you're collecting the olives. Leave what remains for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. That's the meaning of justice, mishpat. We long for that kind of justice in Vancouver. And like Vancouver, like Jerusalem, Vancouver is a city that needs peace, that needs shalom. That line in the psalm, it says, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem," is so beautiful in Hebrew. It goes, "Alu shalom Yerushalem yishlayu ohabayik." But even though Vancouver doesn't have that alliteration, Jerusalem, Vancouver still needs that shalom, that deep integration and wholeness, where all relationships are restored and well, where nothing is missing and nothing is broken. And finally, like Jerusalem, Vancouver needs shalva. That's the word that is translated security or prosperity in this poem, but it's actually better translated quietness, ease, tranquility, rest, at-homeness. We want those who love Vancouver to feel a deep at-homeness here. And we long for this to be a sanctuary and a place of rest for refugees and other people who are weary, no matter their economic or social status. So we can sing this song for Vancouver just like the psalmist sang it for Jerusalem. Of course, Jesus sang this song too. He prayed these very prayers when he joined his family on the pilgrimage at age 12 when he went to the temple. And then when he entered that same city, that same temple city at age 33, he wept, saying, "You did not know what would bring you shalom. You did not recognize the time of God coming to you." 1,000 years of pilgrimages and prayers and songs, and they did not recognize their own God when God showed up in Jesus. This God who had a bigger, scandalous plan to welcome in the outcasts and make it a house of prayer for all nations. I do think this is a beautiful psalm, but it's still limited. It's only about the tribes of Israel. There's a kind of in-house and even somehow exclusive feel to it. It's primarily a prayer about the psalmist's own people, his friends, and his relatives. But unity, justice, peace, and tranquility, these are things that all nations, everyone should experience. So I think we need to look through and beyond this psalm, because we have the advantage of 3,000-year hindsight of seeing more of God's salvation plan unfolded in Jesus. And of course, the writers of the New Testament called all of our lives pilgrimages. They said that we're all on the way, the open way, I gotta say that, to the New Jerusalem, a city where our prayers for unity and peace will all finally be answered. And it's a city to which not just the tribes of Israel, but all nations will come and learn peace together. A city where the festivals and feasts aren't just 3 times a year, but all the time, this perpetual feast that never ends. Its gates never shut. And the city has no temple, for God and the Lamb are the temple. And the city has no sun, for all the nations will be marching in the light of God. So I have a challenge for you folks in the next couple months. We're going to study. So if we want unity in Vancouver, we need to overcome our own stereotypes and our own divisions. And if we want justice, we need to sacrifice our leftover olives, or whatever that might be in your life. If we want shalom, we will need to pursue reconciliation. And if we want tranquil rest, we will need to quiet our own anxieties and welcome the stranger to make their home here with us. So with the psalmist, we can walk, we can wander our city, we can notice and become aware and awake to where God's showing up. And our desire for unity, for justice, for peace, for tranquility will grow, and this desire will become our prayer, our psalm, our own call to action. So pilgrims of Vancouver, may God bless you as you wander.